Today we will be discussing about the fishing gear and techniques and how they are classified, right? And then what are the types of fishing gear, how they can be classified, right? What are the major types of the methods, and also what kind of a species are we targeting, and then what is something called this selectivity of a gear, whether they really selective for one species or a particular size, or if the fishing gear is going to catch any fish that happen to get, or how efficient are they, these fishing gear, whether they are really efficient or not, and also the what sort of impact that the fishing gear would have on the fish as well as the environment. Right? These are the things we were trying to discuss today, but as you can see, it's a sort of a lengthy sort of a discussion that we're going to have. So if you start with some definitions, rather terms that you'll be using, the fishing gear versus method. A fishing gear is the tool that we will be using for catching fish, right? And the method is how you are using that tool, right? So it's clear. The gear is the tool, and the method is how we are using that tool, because the same tool may be using in different ways in different water bodies or different environments or by different fishermen. So same gear will be used in different ways. Right? The other thing you need to know is about the word gear. Right? Most people get confused gear versus gears. Right? In a vehicle, you know about the gear. We can call it as gears, because it's like a system of wheels or something like a gears. But in the fishing gear, actually, so gear is already a plural term, so you don't have to add s. And so it's a fishing gear, right? Not really gears. But even in some books, they say it's gear. But better you avoid that, and it's fishing gear. So when selecting or deciding what gear to be used, either by the fisherman or the authorities or whoever want to put a fishing gear, so there is a certain criteria that they have to go through. I mean, the fisherman might not really go through this criteria, but at least they might think of what kind of fishing gear to be used. There are many things that they have to think of when selecting a particular fishing gear. Right? And especially if it is the authorities, they have to consider this very much. If the fishing going to be selective or not, right? Whether the fishing gear will be selective for some species or whether they are not, and what are the target species, what kind of a species this fishing gear to be targeted, and what be the size of the fish that this gear should be targeted, right? And then what kind of impact this gear would have on the environment or on the fish. So that's something to think, right? Other than that, how effective this fishing, there are some fishing gear, they might not be very effective, whereas the other fishing gear will be very effective, right? Another thing is the quality of the fish. Once caught, it is very important factor whether that quality of the fish not going to degrade because of the catching or because of the using a particular fishing gear. The quality need to be appropriate level if you are selecting a particular fishing gear. That's also something that they need to consider. Right? Other than that, there are so many other things to think of as well. For example, I have listed some of the things here. That is the behavior. Right? That's why we learned a little bit of fish biology before. Right? The behavior of fish is very important when designing or deciding. Right? It's not only the designing of a fishing gear as well as deciding which gear to be used. So these are very important that they consider the fish behavior, right? So that whether they are carnivore or herbivore, or what kind of a fishing gear, fishing behavior, so what sort of a behavior they have, even like a feeding habit, likewise, sorry. So the species targeted, as I mentioned before, even the intended market, right? So what kind of a market you are targeting, whether it's a local market or like that we are catching that fish just for like a as a fish food or for human consumption, or whether it's going to be for a foreign market, right? So all these matter. So these need to be considered because the, the you have to spend a lot of money for catching them. So you have to think of the market, whether it's going to be profitable or not. Another consideration is active versus passive fishing gear, right? So there's some fishing gear active. Just using that fishing gear, you directly catch fish. But whereas the other fishing gear, you just put the gear, but it's the voluntary process that the fish will get into the gear voluntarily, right? So I'll come to that one later on. What this distinction between the active versus passive gear, right? The other things like energy consumption, that's also very important because it's going to be very costly if you're if the energy consumption is very high, they're going to be costly. And sometimes even the season, like which season you're going to be used, right? Likewise, there are so many things to think of before deciding a particular fishing gear, right? Other than that, the other behavior of fish, something like whether they are schooling fish or not. Like a schooling fish is like whether they are living in a large groups, right? So if they are living in a large group, so just using something like a fishing rod is not enough. So you need to have a better or large fishing gear, right? Then whether they are sedentary or active, that also very important. And then like a attraction to light. So some fish, maybe some prawns, crabs, they might attract to the fish. So light. So that also need to be considered. If they are attracted to the light, so fishermen will use some light to attract them, right? Likewise, there are so many things to be considered in any. Sorry, there was a small disturbance. Right, so there are so many things to think of if you are planning, or if the fisherman planning for what kind of fishing gear to be used, right? Now, if you consider a little bit more on the behavior, as I mentioned before, like the attraction to the light, this quite often some fishermen use, especially in some of the fishing gear, they use this light as a attractant, right? Sometimes they use a kerosene lamp or sometimes other light bulbs to attract, especially the nighttime active fish, something like a squids, some prawns even, right? Another thing to consider is like a spawning behavior, like especially when some prawns, they have some sort of a spawning migration. So fishermen target that migration. Of course, this is not really a good idea because they are going for spawning to produce new ones, but that's not the right time to catch them. But unfortunately, that's how in the fisherman's point of view, they need to catch fish anyway. They don't consider or care about whether they're going for spawning or not. But if it is the authorities, they need to have really um, consideration for that, because if it is a spawning migration, they shouldn't allow to catch them, right? So that is a management perspective. Another thing is this, like some aggregation behavior. Like some fish has some behavior that they can aggregate, or they can come together when they see something. Just like if they see something floating, so they will gather in these areas, which can be used in a lot of fishermen. Now they use this as a sort of a tract. And I don't know whether you have heard about, like in the down south, there is a fishing method called kotam panne. Right? Kotam panne is usually the fishing method. They use the panna, the term used for the like fishing method. Kotang is just like they use the wooden logs, like they put a wooden log or some sort of a platforms where the fish get attracted to these things, and they surround that, leave it for there, and they just surround that log, remove it, and get all the gathered fish. Like it's becoming so popular now. All right, the other thing, like that they have to consider whether they are the fish living in the pelagic zone, right, or in the upper layer of the seawater or the ocean, whether they are demersal or bottom associated, or whether they are really in the bottom, sea bottom. Right. So depend on where they are, you have to target or you have to plan your fishing method. For example, even if you use a fishing net, right, a usual fishing net, right? If you want to catch a species like in the mid-range, so you have to lower your gear to that area. But if they are in the bottom, then you have to put your gear into the bottom, right? So if you use a net somewhere here, and if you expect prawns or crabs to be caught in this, it's never going to happen, right? So that thing you have to decide on. As you can see now, I have superimposed some fishing gear for different layers. You see, for these are the layers that fish live. Then you can target different gear for the fish living in that different layers, like this kind of a large net called the purse seine for catching the pelagic fish, right? Whereas some pelagic trawl or mid trawl for catching in the mid level, whereas the bottom trawls or the bottom set nets, or otherwise this kind of lines, long lines can be used, like in the bottom long lines, right? So that's all depend on what kind of fish you are targeting, right? You see, to become a fisherman, it's not that hard, it's that easy something. You need to have a lot of knowledge on the fish, right? They really need to be a biologist, though they are not really biologists, but they need to have this sort of information, especially because the most of the fishermen, they are not going to catch fish, right? They are going to catch particular fish. Right? Even before going to the sea, they decide whether they are going to catch hurulla, whether they are going to catch halmasa or sala, whether they are going to catch balaya or kelawalla, or whether they are going for prawns or crabs. Right? Without knowing who is going to be there, but they plan who is going to catch, and that everything depend on their knowledge as well as the type of fishing gear that they are going to use and where they are going to apply, right? So it's very clear now. They need to have a lot of the background knowledge. All right. So again, as I mentioned before, the fishing gear can be either active or passive gear. The passive gear is, right, it's like you leave the fishing gear and you can't do anything other than just leaving it there, that the fish will get into the fishing gear. It's sort of a voluntary thing. But the active gear, where you actively catch them, a particular target fish, you catch them actively. For example, like if you use a hand net to catch a particular fish, I mean, it's active fishing gear. Whereas you put some sort of a trap, you leave it there, and the fish will come to that trap. I mean, if they get caught, that is passive gear, right? So it's very clear. I mean, it's not something difficult, right? It's just like something similar to trapping and hunting in the wild or in the land or the terrestrial land. And if you are hunting an animal, so that is an active fishing, active type of catching animals. But a trap, if you use a trap, that is a passive, right? So it's very clear. Okay, so I have given some examples here for passive and active gear, like these are passive gear on your left, whereas the active fishing gear on your right, like trawls, and even a cast net like this, they are active fishing gear because you directly put top of fish, and then they are not allowed to move away from this net, and that is active type of fishing gear, right? The others are passive, like in the all the traps and the lines, even the nets that use like a gill nets, they all are passive type fishing gear, right? So this, the different type of, like whether they use active or passive fishing gear, there is no a unique or some specific method to decide whether you're going to use active or passive fishing gear, but they all depend on the all these factors that we discussed before, right? It's a fisherman choice whether they are going to use active or fishing gear. Of course, it's not only the fisherman will decide, but also depend on who you are targeted, right? So on that, based on that, you have to decide whether it's going to be active or passive fishing gear. And in this diagram, you will see a lot of different types of fishing gear, especially the major type of fishing gear that are common around the world, right? I don't know how many of you have seen this type of fishing gear. If you are not very familiar with these things, like the number one here, right, is a trap, usually for crabs. These are used. Likewise, number two is a diving, right? So diving is also a type of fishing gear, especially if you are targeting some fish, as well as especially the ornamental fish if you are targeting. So you will be catching them with diving, like long lines, the trawls, right? In trawls, whether they are bottom trawls or the mid-water trawls, or the others like this, the trawling lines, and these are the boat seines, and this is a a net, this is a long line, and this is a purse seine. We'll come to these things later, right? Before going further, let's see, there's a small video. After that, we'll come back. Actually, that video just showing the fishing methods. There was no any audio, so I forgot to mention that one, right? So it is just an introduction to different types of fishing gear. You might have seen like how these gear operated, as well as how they could impact on the ocean, especially in the bottom, something like dredges, as well as the bottom trawls, how they can destroy the bottom habitats. But we'll come to these things later on. So before going into each and every fishing gear, let's try to classify them in a sort of a systematic way. There are so many different type of fishing gear because it's one of the oldest industries in the world, and different countries having their own fishing gear as well as the methods. But it's so difficult actually to classify them. But there is some way of classifying the fishing gear that system has developed by the FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization. As you can see here in this, this is the sort of a technical paper. It says the definition and classification of fishing gear categories. This is available in the web anyway. You can download if anyone interested. I don't think so. Among so many different type of fishing gear, they have like a recognized of at least 11 type of the fishing gear, like a categories. So these are the 11 categories of or the groupings or the categories of fishing gear as for the FAO technical paper. Right? I have put the images for each type or each category, but also they have listed here. The number one is the surrounding nets. Right? As you would see here, it's a surrounding net that that will, as the name says, it will surround a group of fish. And so something like a purse seine. Then second type also seine nets, but these are just not the normal purse seines, but normal seine nets. The best example for this seine nets is the beach seine, Madal. The Madal is come under this second category, which is called the seine nets. The number three is a trawl net, which you might have seen or you might have heard about trawls, especially the bottom trawl. It's a huge net. And the dredger is another fishing gear that's a bit similar to a trawl net, but the difference is like it has a mechanism that can operate in the bottom among the sediment, or like they're looking for any marine organisms in the among the sediments, like it will dig through the sediment looking for some marine organisms, especially for some mussels, scallops, something like that. Right? Then we have the lift nets like this. Lift nets are not something actually common in Sri Lanka, not really common. We don't have actual lift net, but some countries, some Asian countries like Thailand, Burma, they have this kind of lift nets. I can show you later. The other type called the falling gear, falling. It just let gear to fall or fell, something like cast net. And another other category is the gill nets and entangling nets, or the gill nets usually, or whatever the similar, there are some other nets which can entangle fish. It's not really the gill net, but little different from gill net. So gill nets and entangling net. Then we have the traps, different types of traps. I think one of the most diverse type of fishing gear, I believe, is the traps. Even in Sri Lanka, we have so many different varieties of traps, which has been developed by different traditional groups, different nations. Right down the country, there's different type of traps. Then the hooks and lines, different types of hooks and lines that include the long lines, the trolling lines, the pole and line, right? We'll discuss later. And the 10 types called the grappling and wounding type, especially like using arrows or harpoons, something like that. The gear that you can directly injure a fish and catching them, especially the harpoons and arrows. The last type, harvesting machines, just like some sort of a pump you can use to catch fish, like you use some machinery or some arrangement to catch fish. They are called harvesting machines. Not very common, but even in Sri Lanka we have some example for harvesting machine, though we call it a machine. They're not really always, they're not machines. Something like the brush piles or brush parks. I don't know whether you have heard about a fishing gear called brush parks or brush piles. Let's discuss later on these types, right? Here in this slide, I have listed out all the, it's not really me listed out. This is the FAO listing of the categories of fishing gear, as well with the examples for different categories. Under each category, even they have put some like subcategories for like to make it easier for someone to recognize different types of fishing gear, right? So basically, these are the 11 types of fishing gear, the harvesting machine, no harvesting gear, whatever, right? Right. So they are the common type of not really common type, but these are the recognized categories of fishing gear. So again, I have given the whole list with some examples. Surrounding nets, the purseine, hambidala, mudidala, light coast cromia. The fishermen use different terms, but that's the same thing, is the purseine. The others are the same nets like a beach seine or madala, and the others are boat seines. Not very common. The Scottish or Danish seines are different. We don't have in Sri Lanka, but we have something like a boat seine. And the trawl nets, different types of trawl nets. Then we have the dredges, the lift net, the falling gear or the cast nets, gill nets and entangling net that include the drift gill net, and the other like called the trammel net or moxie nets. I will explain later on. Then the traps, hooks and line, different types of hooks and line, and the grappling and wounding gear, that's the harpoons, spear guns or arrows, whatever the gear, and the harvesting gear, right? So these are the basic categories of fishing gear, right? So now keep in mind, like sometimes in the examinations, you might be given like what are the major type of fishing gear? Right, I have asked this question a couple of times. Right, like a lot of you, they get confused. They're not really put in this list, rather they use different terms for that, right? So if I'm asking for the categories of, they put like a passive gear, active gear, right? Right, but they are not really categories, right? So keep in mind that one. I'm asking about the categories. What are the different categories of fishing gear? And if I'm asking for that, you just need to say, I won't ask for the all 11 type categories, but what are the major categories of fishing gear or something like that. So keep in mind that. All right, so let's dig into the very briefly on each type of fishing gear. Right. So very briefly, because there are a lot of things to learn about this fishing gear. They are all different from one another, right? So basically, you need to know the name of the fishing gear with like how it is operated, right? And who they are targeted, right? And then the other than like what is the category of that fish, the fishing gear, whether it's active or passive gear, right? Under the FAO categories, under what category it's listed, like, and also basically what kind of fish they are targeting, like this. And another very important thing, what kind of a craft will be used with operating this fishing gear, right? This kind of a very basic information you need to know about. Like there are no many, like we're talking about the 11 categories, maybe 15, 20 types of fishing gear, are very basic information that you need to know, at least on the major categories, major type of fishing gear. Because I mean, usually I ask you to give some like write short notes on any of the following fishing gear. Then you have to give that very basic information, right? At least these things that I mentioned about. Same as before, like when I give this question, a lot of students get confused. Like if I'm asked to write on the per se, right? The question is about write short notes on any of the following fishing gear. I might give like a 3 type of major fishing gear. You were asked to give short notes on maybe 2 of them or all three of them. It's depend, right? Like the question about the person, and when I ask about the person, they write about the beach seine. And it's very often that the student get confused. Like you don't really understand that this different kind, right? So you got 0 marks. I mean, if the name of the gear is wrong, if you have recognized wrongly that fishing gear, so you don't get any marks for that, right? This happens quite often. Every year I have seen this. Almost every year I usually ask about this kind of a question. But almost every year the same thing. A greater proportion of the student get mistake. They really don't understand the major categories actually. So, and I won't ask each and every fishing gear, but as you know, that there are key fishing gear which I might highlight towards the end. So you just need to know a little bit on that, right? So per se, as you would see here, you can imagine how big this per se can be. You see the vessel operated for this per se is not really even a boat. It is a sort of a small ship. So you can imagine how big this net can be compared to this the large craft or the large ship, smaller ship. It's a huge net. So how it is being operated? There is a unique design actually in this net. It's called purse seine, right? Purse seine. But the local or the Sinhalese name is much better because it says Hambili Dala. Right? You know, the Hambili that come from purse, but it implies that it's something like it making a bag like something. Right? How it work? It's something like this. You see, it's a something like this, like just like a normal net. The difference here is like is a long net with two ends, like it's, you can separate it from here with the two ends. You have like the top, there's a top rope. All the net is connected to the top rope here, and as well as there's a bottom rope. Now, if you can see here in the right diagram, not like the top rope, the bottom rope, you see it's not really tied to the rope, but it's like a ring. So it is with a ring. So what happened when they pull the rope, when they pull the bottom rope, right before that, how it is operated actually, usually they use a large craft like this, like a seining is specifically designed for this purpose, because it's a huge net. It needs some mechanical device to operate, especially for launching as well as hauling or taking it back. It needs mechanical devices. With the fish, it's going to be heavy, right? Usually go with another one or two crafts, usually one craft, right? One big craft as well as smaller craft. What they do is, while they're keeping one end with the larger craft, when they spot a large school of fish, with the small craft, they surround the whole area. The whole fish school will be surrounded by this net, right? Once surrounded, and that craft will come back to the boat, to the big craft, and thereafter the bottom rope, they will drag the bottom rope, making the net into like a half circle, like a bag like thing. Right? Thereafter they even drag the top rope as well, then making it like a bag. Right? That's why you call the purse seine or the Hambili Dela. It make like a bag like thing during the operation, right? So that's how it's being operated. Now, some of the characteristic of this fishing gear is that it's extremely large. It can catch tons of fish in a single hole, right? It's a highly efficient fishing gear. Of course, it can be very expensive as well to operate, because it's already a huge net. The net itself will cost millions of rupees. So, but at the same time, it's highly efficient. Usually they are always targeting the large schooling fish, something like a mackerels, tuna, maybe small tunas, not the big ones like a balaya, and even the smaller ones like the alagudwa, ralgudwa, and tawalla, something like that. The smaller tuna fish, they will be targeting like that. The schooling fish, when they spot the schooling fish, will only operate this kind of fishing gear, because it's quite expensive to operate. Just for keep couple of fish, you won't be able to operate this, right? So that's how it's being operated. another thing is not selective, because you see it will be surround, like it's a surrounding net. It will like surround the whole area, and there's no any selection. It will catch anything like as it is this bigger than the size of the net. It will catch anything in that area. So it's not a selective fishing gear, right? So let me show you another video.
Fishermen use purse seine nets to capture schooling fish like tunas, salmon, and anchovies. Sometimes fishing vessels deploy floating rafts called fish aggregating devices, also called FADs, to attract fish in the open ocean. Large nets encircle the school of fish, as well as other animals that may be attracted to the FAD. The bottom of the net is drawn shut to prevent the fish from escaping, and then the nets and the fish are gathered into the fishing vessel. When purse seiners use FADs, the accidental catch of juvenile fish, sharks, and other vulnerable animals can be a serious conservation concern. By eliminating the use of FADs, purse seiners can significantly reduce the number of animals that are accidentally caught by this fishing method.
Right, so that is purse seine, habilidala, or madidala, sometimes it's called. So that fishing gear actually has been very, I can't call it's very popular, but some sort of a popular fishing gear. But you see, this is usually targeting smaller fish, like smaller schooling fish. The smaller fish usually are in the coastal zone, not in very deep waters. So there is a lot of conflict between the traditional fishermen and the fishermen operating this kind of a heavy fishing gear. So because of that, now it is illegal to operate this kind of a highly effective fishing gear in the coastal zone. So you can operate in the offshore areas. We'll discuss this towards the end when you talk about the fisheries management perspective, right? So that's the first seine, and the second type is the second category of the fishing nets. As for the FAO is the seine nets, if you remember. So under seine nets, the most popular type of seine net is the beach seine. And even in Sri Lanka, this is very popular, what we call madala, right? Madala. Some people call it as a drag net, but that's not the correct term. You have so many different types of drag nets, but this is a madala. The madala, they call it madala because it's a mahadala. It's very big, and that's why now the term they use as a madala. Mahadala has become madala. It's basically, as you can see, here's two ropes, large ropes, and they are heavy ropes as well for towing the fishing gear. And there is two wings either side, right? Usually in the wing, the net size, or the mesh size rather, the mesh size of the net is larger, right? It's not like a small mesh, but it's a larger mesh size just to direct fish into the net. And towards the end, there is a bag-like thing, which is called cod end, right? COD. It's called the cod end. In the cod end, there's a small mesh size, and fish are being caught in the cod end, right? So this seine net actually is quite large, as I mentioned. It can be like more than 1 kilometer in the sea. It might lead to 1 kilometer or even more than that sometimes, 1.5 or even 2 kilometers, because they are operated in a basically shallow waters. What they usually do is that they keep one end in the shore and the other end they take to the deep waters until the cod end and take the other end back to the shore. Right? So that's how they operate. While keeping one end here, they take the other end to the sea and then take the second end back to the shore and leave it for a while for the fish to settle, and they start towing it to the land from the both sides by a two group of people. Right? You might have seen this in the coastal zone, operating this kind of a nets, right? And you see that they use heavy weights in the bottom and the floats in the top. So because of that, it's keep opened throughout the drag, right? Because the heavy weights and the floats will keep it straight in the water column from the bottom up to the surface, as you can see here from the boil, right? And then they start dragging it. It will, you know, the operation of the fishing net, it will take like more than 3 hours, right? Because you need a lot of manpower as well, right? As you can see here, there are like the smaller versions of the beach seine as well, right? Which you can operate by even 2-3 people, but not very common in Sri Lanka. Even sometimes they can operate in from a boat. It's called the boat seine then, but that also not very common. But the beach seine is one of the most common type of fishing gear right around the country that you might have seen in the coastal zone, right? Now you see that technology has come into play even in this beach seines. As you can see, I took this photograph from when I was in Mana. Now they have started using tractors modified for dragging this net. You can see here there's a winch purposely built for this dragging a beach seine. And you can think of, you see, this is the setup just before launching the Madala. You can see the weights, they use the concrete weights to sink into the bottom, and they use the floats to keep it afloat. It's a huge net, as you would see, because that's how it runs to about 1 or 2 kilometers into the sea. It's a huge net, need a lot of manpower as well. I mean, even with the tractor, you still need a lot of manpower, right, to keep it, because it's a huge, and smooth operation need a lot of people, right? So all these images actually taken from the same area in Mana when we're doing some field works there. This is the catch here. And this is the winch. They have like a, I think it's locally manufactured, I guess. Right, so that is the beach seine. If you need further information about the beach seine, of course, I have already included a couple of videos in the LMS site. You can, when you have free time, because to save time, because playing these videos 5-10 minutes, it is unnecessary to waste time, our air time. So I put some of the videos, especially the lengthy ones, in the Scholar site, LMS site, so where you can have a look and have a better understanding about the gear. So in this case, as you can see, the beach chain, they are non-selective fishing gear because it has no any selection. Here the cod end or the bag like thing is, it has a very fine mesh, so it can catch a smallest possible fish to even a largest one. Right? Anything in between, there's no any selection for species. You can see any type of fish here, to prawns, to crabs and squids, and even jellyfish, and even the sea snakes, reptiles, anything you will be there. So it's non-selective fishing gear, and can be really destructive as well because it's dragging the bottom. Might be some sea grasses here, and even you see if you use the tractors, how they can damage the beach habitats as well. But anyway, this is a common fishing gear in Sri Lanka, right? So the third type of fishing category is called the trawl net, right? So TRAW, trawl. There is another trawl as well. That's why I spell out this spelling, that trawl net, TRAW. The trawl is like a cone-like fishing gear. It can be very big as well. It can be operated in the surface or the mid or even the bottom, based on the where it is operated. You can call it like a bottom trawl or like a mid-water trawl or like surface trawl, whatever. Different, you can use a different terms. Usually it's targeting the pelagic, or sometimes in the bottom associated fish. Of course, this cannot be operated for like the bottom dwelling fish, but like bottom associated fish can be caught with this kind of fishing gear, right? So this is the bottom trawl. As you would see, it's like a bit similar to a beach chain, but the difference is where the beach chain is vertical, whereas this one is, sorry, it's a horizontal, whereas this one is more vertical, because the bottom lip and the top lip is sort of a vertical, and also the shape is different from the one. And then there is some sort of a board, as you can see, called the auto board. These boards helpful in keeping the mouths open, right? In the both end of the nets, it is attached to two ropes, and these ropes are the one that tied to the ship or the vessel for dragging this net. Again, this is very big net. You can't operate with the human power. You need a boat to operate this one, right? So bottom trawl, as you can see here, is how it is being operated by a large craft. The two ends of the net has been dragged from this craft. So these are the outer boards. They also have the floats, and this is common thing in most of the fishing gear. In the bottom, they have the weights. It can be concrete or sometimes even the stones, but it's usually the lead weights, right? Whereas in the surface, they have the floats made of especially the polystyrene, or what we call the rigiform. Right? And this trawl net also have a cod end, where fish being caught in this cod end. Right? It has a small mesh size in the cod end, which means this also a non-selective fishing gear, because it has no selection. It can catch anything from a smaller fish to a larger one, and even sometimes you can like a couple 2 or 3 nets like this, and it's being like a twin trawl, can be operated as well, right? So again, a small video showing how it's been operated.
A bottom trawl is a type of fishing net that's pulled along the seafloor. Fishermen commonly use bottom trawls to catch shrimp and bottom-dwelling fish like halibut and sole. In addition to these target fish, however, the nets also catch a variety of ocean life that's usually thrown back dead or dying. Dragging heavy gear across the seabed can also damage sensitive seafloor habitat. Reducing the harmful effects of bottom trawling requires either modifying the fishing gear or limiting the areas where trawling is allowed to protect sensitive bottom-dwelling organisms and their habitat.
So as you have seen, the bottom trawl is a non-selective fishing gear. At the same time, it can be very destructive fishing gear as well, because these are being, if it is operated, especially in like a sensitive habitat, which is more likely to operate in a like in the seagrass bed. But of course, they won't operate somewhere like in the coral reefs, because it's going to damage the fishing net. Of course, if it is they will do it, but the reefs will totally destroy the nets, and then they are not usually used. If trawl net to be operated, it's very important that the bottom has to be sort of a flat and sandy bottom. But in this sandy bottoms, you can see some seagrass beds. So they might operate in the seagrass beds, but it is very important that these being operated in sandy bottoms, right? The areas where there are some sandy bottoms, these fishing gear is being operated, right? As that video also discussed, one of the challenges or one of the destructive part of this fishing net is like the bottom, they have to use weight, especially they might use like a chain to keep it in the bottom, or even to like get the fish out of the sediment. They use this kind of a chain or some heavy things. But rather than that, if they use something like some wheels like these, and that will reduce the impact to the bottom. Like in some countries, they have made it mandatory. The bottom trawls use this kind of a accessory where the damage to the bottom will be minimum, right? But in Sri Lanka now, the bottom trawling was not quite common in Sri Lanka earlier, but now it's becoming popular. So it can be really damaging the marine environment, right? So the fourth type of fishing gear is the dredges. As you know, Sri Lanka, we are not very familiar with this. We are not eating many mollusks, especially the clams and the other gastropods. So dredges are not something common, or I haven't even seen in Sri Lanka. We have dredges just to like dredging the like lagoons or the coastal zone, just for like when you want to dig somewhere, but it is not for fishing. So so they are targeting the any organisms living in the bottom, so like in the, especially in the sediment, where the trawl net won't be able to like dig into the sediment like that to catch fish, but this does, right? So it can do like, right? So this is how a dredger can be used for catching, especially some mollusks like the scallops. They're being operated in the bottom for scallops, right? So I don't want to put a lot of into this because it's not a common fishing gear in Sri Lanka. So the fifth type of fishing gear is the lift net. As I mentioned before, this is not available in Sri Lanka. It's not a common, not really common. We don't have actually this. So I forgot to mention like whether this is active or passive fishing gear. Like a dredger, it's a active fishing gear because you are directly catching the fish in this case. Even the lift net is a active fishing gear because You just put it into the bottom and drag, and then fish will be caught. Like in the beach chain, the person, they all are active fishing gear, right? Because you're forcefully catching the fish. So that's about the lift net. Then the falling gear, the sixth category of the FAO listing, that's the cast net, Visidala, as you know. It's very popular fishing gear, especially among the traditional fishermen. You might have seen, especially in the lagoons and in the coastal zone, even in the rivers and even the lakes or tanks, some people operate this cast net. It's a beautiful picture to look at how they operate this cast net, especially you need a skill to operate it. If we throw it, like, it will just fall into the water, but there is a way it can be cast. It can like cover a huge area if you cast it properly, otherwise it just drop into the water. You won't catch any fish out of this. So the design of the cast net, as you can see here, it's like it also have weights in the bottom, right? And it's like a cone like structure, right? With the string, right? You throw it into the water. When you throw it into, like, it covers a large area, and when you haul it or when you drag it to the surface, and because of the weights in the bottom, they come closer, right? They come closer and make something like a bag, like here, you see, because it's heavy weights in the bottom. Because of that, the fish won't fall off, or they can't even escape, and even the fish will be entangled in the net as well. So that's how they are caught, right? So that is the mechanism. I think there is a small video for that one as well. Not very clear, something I was looking for some gear, like so they are targeting a group of fish, like here, not big fish, like, you can't catch big fish with this. They are targeting this kind of smaller fish, maybe in the lagoons. And this is once they are thrown and they drag it. Right, so that's how they haul it to the surface. Right. So that is how they are being collected, right? So as you have seen, it's not very efficient type of fishing gear, but for the traditional fishermen, doesn't cost much. As far as you have the gear, you can operate it many times, and that's they are being called, right? So the fishing gear category 7 is a gill net and other entangling nets. So this is a gill net. They are called gill net. You know what is a gill, right? So they are karamal dal kila singling, karamal dal or the gill net, because these nets are designed in such a way that when the fish can, the mesh size is just right for fish to get in to the net. I mean, in between the net, they can just pass, but when they reach the highest position, usually around the gills, they won't be able to go further. So they are trying to go back. Now what happened there, because of that, the operculum or the gill bone, so we call the operculum, so they entangle in that operculum. So that's why we call it a gill net. So it's specifically designed to catch or to hold the fish from the operculum. But of course, sometimes they will, like, even their fins will be entangled. But basically, the theory behind catching fish is like the operculum will be entangled in the net. Right. So this is very important, that the mesh size here, because depend on the mesh size, you will be selecting what kind of a fish you will be catching. Like if you put a net for the hurula, a bigger fish, you will never catch a halmasa or even a sardine to that net, because they can just go through that net and they won't be caught here. But you need the just right size for catching particular fish, right? So as before, like they all have the floats on the surface, and in the bottom they have the weights to keep it in a particular position. If you want to put it in the bottom, you just increase the weight and reduce the floats, and it will go to sink to the bottom. But if you want to put it in the surface, you reduce the weights and put more the buoys or the floats, and then it will float on the surface, right? That's how it is operated. So you have to use the buoyancy principle here, right? So you see, fishermen, they need to be not only biologists, need to know a little bit of physics as well to keep this nets float, right? So even this net can be operated in the bottom, which we call in the bottom set gill net. Then the same net, but they can be operated in the bottom as well, right? So this is how the fish being caught in the gill net. In the next time, if you're been to a beach where you will see this kind of a net, you can see how different fish are being caught in this different size, right? So again, there's a small video to show that.
Gill nets are walls of netting designed to entangle fish. These nets can also accidentally catch ocean animals like sea turtles, marine mammals, and sharks. Fishermen can take measures to reduce this accidental catch by setting the nets deeper in the water column to allow room for animals to swim over, and adding gear like pingers, which warn passing.
The next type of fishing gear we call traps and pods. Traps are actually type of very traditional and oldest type of fishing gear. There have been many different types of traps that has been used by different countries, by different groups. So it's one of the most diverse type of fishing gear. So even in Sri Lanka, there are so many types. And the other hand is the traps are passive fishing gear, as you can see, because we just set these traps and then the fish will enter the trap voluntarily. So we can call them as a passive type of fishing gear, right? So traps are passive type of fishing gear. Some traps may be very simple, but whereas some of the fishing gear, some of the traps rather, they can be extremely complex sometimes. Something like this, which you might not have seen this kind of a fishing gear, but in Sri Lanka, even in the lagoons, some time back, the fishermen were using something similar to this one, but we have something similar still using in the, some of our lagoons. So we will discuss these things later, right? For example, this fight net, it's being using in the lagoons with two wings and a trapping mechanism. You can see that it's a cylindrical trapping mechanism where the fish can go inside, but for them, because it's like, you see, it's small entrance here, they can go inside, but they can't find the way back, so they will trap inside, right? So there can be many different versions of this kind of a traps, right? And then there can be a large type of similar traps, which you might have seen perhaps in the, like in the Bolgota Lake. If you have been that area, you might have seen this kind of traps. It's a large trap, like they're putting across the river even. So that also trapping mechanism, especially for crabs and prawns. The even they might put some light traction at night, and then they will collect the catch. Right? So all these are different types of traps, and as I said, it can be some of the very simple traps like this, some pots, to even this kind of traps that's commonly used, this kind of traps we call the crab pots, for catching crabs in the coastal zone, like among the, like a mangrove habitat. Usually they set up this kind of a trap with some bait, and they catch crabs in this way, right? And from that to some of the traditional type of fishing gear, right? As you can see, these gear you will see only in the museums. I got these images from I think Pera Deni Gannoru. There was an agricultural museum. I got these images from there. This one called the Karaka, or the Karagediya in general terms, right? As it says, the Karagediya. The other one is the Kemana. Very traditional type of fishing gear, but as you would see, even this very traditional fishing gear, they have kept some distance between these the sticks, just for a small fish to escape from the gear, and some people say it's more like a sustainable type of fishing gear. Well, can be, but not 100% sustainable. There's no something called a sustainable fishing gear, but they will reduce at least the small fish being trapped into this kind of fishing gear. Right? So anyway, this is a traditional fishing, and this is the fight net. As I mentioned before, this fight nets has been using in lagoons, still maybe somewhere, even in the Negombo lagoon, time to time you would see this kind of traps, but it's not something very common. They are now being replaced by the other fishing gear that being used by different fishermen. But the exception is this one, as also as type of traps we call the stake nets. In local terms, is called kattudal. You would see this kind of kattudals in Negombo rarely now, but you will see many of these in northern region, especially in the lagoons in Jaffna. You will see everywhere this kind of traps. It's called kattudal, or the stake nets, right? There are a lot of stories behind this kattudal. It's very old or historical type of fishing gear. Especially this trapping mechanism is actually they set up these traps in the river mouths, especially when they're in the river mouth where the river discharges into the sea, targeting the migratory prawns. So that's usually a spawning migration. Not really good idea, as I mentioned before, but but that's how the fishermen target anyway. That's looking at their behavior, that they know that the timing of their spawning migration, and that's where they target this kind of a cartudel. As you would see, all these images I took in when I was in one of the field classes in Jaffna Lagoon. You will see this kind of traps everywhere, this kind of a stake nets. Right, it's one of the most common type of fishing gear now in Jaffna. So actually these stake nets, they are considered as one of the older type of fishing gear, as well as some form of fishing method with a lot of management rules, and in particular something what we call the co-management. Right? We will discuss about the co-management later on, but now like we consider this kind of a terms like a co-management is something came from the Western to our world, but the concept of co-management has been even among our fishermen in the past. I will discuss this later on when we're talking about the fisheries management. So anyway, so they have been using, especially in Inigambu, the cartudel has been using with some sort of a co-management practice, which has been very successful by that time. Right? Okay, another category of fishing gear is the stow nets. It's something similar to some dragging net, but this is more stationary than like a dragging. But these stow nets are not very common in Sri Lanka, other than a variant of this stow nets. It's this kind of a push net. I'm not too sure about if you have seen this push net. I took these images when from Putlam Lagoon, maybe about a decade back, in one of the field classes for the oceanography. At that time, they were using this push net. They were just pushing very simple fishing gear, as you can see. Just two bamboo poles with like a conical shape, or rather triangular shape net, where they will be pushing in the sandy lagoons. They will be just doing it by wading in the lagoon, right? Especially in the among seagrass beds. It's in that sense, it's not really a good fishing practice, especially if you are pushing in the seagrass beds. That will destroy the bottom habitats. But anyway, the poorest fishermen will use this kind of fishing gear. We can't complain. Right. So apart from that, the other type of fishing gear, like a similar category fishing gear, include something like this, a tow net, especially targeting larval, especially for research purposes. Actually, this is called a bongo net, usually used for the fisheries research purposes, right? And the other type of fishing gear we call the barriers, fences, or weirs. Right? As I mentioned before, the crawls, or the fishing gear that's being using across the river. This kind of things. So they can be very large type of fishing gear, usually set up in the rivers. But this kind of weirs, not seen in Sri Lanka, but some of the countries, like even in Australia, you will see this kind of weirs, like it's like a wall against a river, right? But if there is a lot of the boat movements, you can't do it. But in some areas, they use this kind of weirs. But as you can see, you can lower it, right, time to time, and where the boats can pass, right? So that is a weirs. And the next type of fishing gear, the very important type of fishing gear, we call hooks and lines. It's very popular anywhere in the world, and it can be used from a simple, like a hand fishing gear, to a very complex, like a long line, right? Anywhere in between, it can be anywhere. So it's one of the most popular type of fishing gear, especially even for the commercial fishing, right? So they use a hook. I think in the laboratory classes, actually, some of you might have discussed these different types of hooks with the barb, and some of the hooks are without barb, right? Anyway, here the main thing is the hook that can be used in different ways, right? So even the hooks and lines, most of the time they are actually passive, because even you put a hook, it doesn't mean that you're going to catch the fish, but some form of hook and line, they can be active as well. So we can explain a little bit further. So that different kind of hooks and line uses, for example, like hand line, the simple form, you can just use a pole, or even without a pole, hand line with a hook. You might have seen in like even like riverside, some people doing this kind of fishing, even in the coast. And the pole and lines, something like this. And the long lines, as you can see in the bottom left, this is a long line, and the other one is a trolling line, right? So don't confuse. This trolling is Trolling, trolling, right? Previously we talked about another troll, that is TRAW troll. We will discuss a little bit further later. So that's a troll, and this that's troll, TRAW. This is trolling. It's a little different from, very different from the nets. Okay, so as I mentioned, the long line fishing is the most popular commercial type of fishing gear, especially the large fish, the billfishes, the tuna, the sharks, and all the big fish that we eat, or you will see in the markets, they are usually caught with these kinds of long line. So that's why it's a most popular type of fishing gear. As you can see here, this is how it would look like when it's set up in the bottom, right? But you can set up it anywhere, like even in the surface, or even in the mid water or in the bottom. But usually you will attach a bait for this one as well. I will show you a small video where you can get much better understanding about what a long line look like.
Long-line vessels deploy miles of fishing lines in the open ocean in pursuit of fish like mahi-mahi, tunas, and swordfish. These vessels have the capacity to set up to 50 miles of baited hooks that can be left to soak overnight or for several days. Along with capturing the target fish, the hooks may also ensnare a variety of ocean animals, including sharks, endangered sea turtles, seabirds, and marine mammals. Fishermen can take measures to reduce the accidental capture of some of these ocean animals. Setting the fishing lines deeper allows many animals to swim over the top. A specially designed fishing hook called a circle hook can make it easier to release an animal that's accidentally been caught. Adding streamers above the water can scare away seabirds and save them from being caught on fishing hooks. Effective fishing gear modifications like these can reduce the impacts of longline fishing on ocean wildlife.
So that is a long line. And the next type of fishing gear is called pole and line. Right? Again, don't confuse this one with the rod and line, like holding a pole. You might have seen some people fishing in the, like in the coast, but that also pole and using a line, but it's not the same fishing gear, but this is a pole and line fishing gear, a particular type of fishing gear targeting tuna. So I will show you that small video and we will get back.
Four different species are fished in the tropical Pacific. These are skipjack tuna, with some yellowfin tuna mixed in. But this boat is not setting nets. The ancient technique of fishing with rod and line is now practiced on an industrial scale. Jets break up the outline of the boat from below and mimic the noise and commotion of baked fish when under attack. Meanwhile, live bait fish are strewn around the boat to keep the tuna interested. It may look like a lot of effort for a few fish, but this pole and line technique of fishing can be surprisingly effective. Fishing for export is now big business in the tropical Pacific, with tuna alone accounting for 30 times more fish than all the fish caught by subsistence fishermen. So is commercial fishing sustainable? Skipjack are the smallest and by far the most abundant tuna species in the Pacific. They reach maturity in just a year and then spawn many times within a season. They seem to be the perfect catch, as their numbers just keep bouncing back.
Right, so that is pole and line fishing, or specifically the fishing for skipjack tuna, right? Maybe that video might be disturbing to some of the viewers, but anyway, so that's how the fish are caught, right, in commercial level. So like in the historically, this pole and line fishing has been one of the most common type of fishing gear in Sri Lanka, especially in the southern Sri Lanka. Right, there is a village, but now we can call it a town. It's called Balapitiya. No, that's the area where the pole and line has been very popular. In local terms, called Balapiti, right? So the type of fishing gear, the pole and line is called Balapiti, and that's how the that city got the name Balapitiya. Right? So, but unfortunately, or for some reason, not really some reason, but nowadays the pole and line fishing is not very popular in Sri Lanka. There are many reasons. One thing is like you need a lot of skillful people to do this job, as well as you need a live bait. As you see, they have to like artificially create a sort of a bait fish school where the skipjack tuna will follow, right? So you have to like even spray water and like it's like a mimic school of prey, and at the same time they put this operate this balapiti or this pole and line, and then eventually the fish get caught. And this barb also different in a pole and line. There like the the hook is different. There is no barb in the hook in the pole and line fishing, right? So because that easily you can release the fish, right? So that is pole and line fishing, and the other type of line and hook and line fishing is called the trolling. As you can see here, right, it is like the one before we discussed about the long line, but in that case, I mean, the line was not dragging, but in this case, actually the shorter lines and they are dragging with a bait attached to the line, to the end of the line. And especially this kind of a gear is designed for predatory fish, especially the fighting fish, something like some of the tunas and even sailfish. They put the bait and boat running is quite fast, and that's why we discussed previously about the feeding habit. I mean, this kind of fish, they prefer follow prey very fast and grab them. So they mimic the same thing in this fishing gear, and that's how they are caught. Right? So these lines may be attached to a branch like this, or sometimes the people holding the line with the like a rod, right? So it can be operated in different way, but it's the same trolling technique. Even in the close to Colombo, somewhere in the like in Vattala area, some people still do this trolling, right? So once again, don't confuse this with TRAWLING, trolling. That is a huge net, but this is a line, right? It's TROLLING. Often a student get confused this when I ask to write a short note on the trolling, TRAW, they write about that this TROLLING trolling, right? So it's very different type of fishing gear, right? Same line and hooks can be used something like this, very simple way. As you might have seen, it's called angling. It's most of the cases for like a sport fishing, just on the river sides or banks or in the coastal line, you will see this kind of angling. That also a line and hook type fishing gear, right? And from that to a unique type of fishing gear that we have in Sri Lanka, nowhere in the world, right? It's a unique, that's called stilt fishing. In local terms, it's called ritipanna, right? Ritipanna. I mean, almost of all you have seen this this scenery, right? Anywhere in our tourism related website, you will see this iconic image somewhere. So because it's a something unique for Sri Lanka, right? So these poles are set in a little bit hard sandy bottom, and they use this pole So most of the cases a kitul tree like a stick. So, and usually they are targeting particular type of fish, especially these spotted herring and mackerels. The fisherman refers to as this korumburua in local terms, and some of the the parau will be targeted as well. But this one is the most popular type of the fish that is caught in this the fishing gear, but maybe some others as well, right? So that is something unique. This is a traditional fishing gear, and also some like people, some fishermen, they maintain this fishing habit from their relatives. But nowadays, this has become more or less a tourism attraction than a fishing practice. Still some fishermen, they do fishing, but most of the case, actually, it's like a tourist attraction. Tourists can get into this one of these poles, and then they can sit or they can pose for a photograph, right? They will charge $5, $7, or $10, right? It's not too bad, right? It doesn't cost anything. You just need to hire this pole and you will get some dollars, right? So, so that is still fishing. And from that to another unique type of fishing gear, it's a grappling and wounding type fishing gear. That's the FAO category 10. Grappling and wounding gear, they are like we use some sort of a pointed or sharp gear directly to catch fish, or sometimes they use the harpoon to, or even can be some spears or arrows. Right? So not very popular in Sri Lanka, but of course this kind of arrows or harpoons, like almost all, not all, but most of the fishermen, when they go offshore fishing, they carry this kind of a gear because when they want to hold a large fish. And spear fishing is actually a very popular type of fishing gear, especially among the sport fishermen, mainly in the coral reefs. They do a lot of spear fishing, but as for the national laws, spear fishing has been prohibited. We will discuss this when we talk about the fisheries management. Right, so that will bring us to the last type of fishing gear category as per the FAO. So that is the harvesting machines. So that can be many different type of harvesting machines. We have one example from Sri Lanka for this category is called the brush piles. In local terms, it's called massatu or massatu. Right? You might have seen this in Nigambu Lagoon, I mean, in many areas, but it's common scenery in Nigambu Lagoon. What they do here, like they cut some branches from most cases from the mangrove branches, mangrove tree branches, and they just like put it in the lagoon. And what they really do is they like create an artificial mangrove habitat, right? Cutting these mangrove trees and make an artificial mangrove habitat where some fish will aggregate in this habitat and then leave it for several days, sometimes maybe 20 days, 30 days, to like for the fish to settle in, to make a habitat. And they surround the whole area and then remove the branches and get the fish will get caught in that nets, right? So that's how they usually operated. Not very sustainable way of fishing, especially they have to cut the mangrove branches. It's illegal to cut the mangrove branches, but this is a common scenery, as I mentioned before. So anyway, some people still practice this as a traditional way of fishing, right? So that is a brush file. And so that's all about the FAO categories of fishing gear. But other than the FAO categories, there are few other fishing methods. They're not coming under any of the FAO categories. For example, like a distractive type fishing gear, and others are we call the stupefying fishing gear. They are like a poisoning, right? Use some form of poisons. It may be not very poisonous, some maybe some tree extracts, or sometimes they even use some extremely poisonous chemicals as well for fishing. Right? So using this kind of a stupefying devices or chemicals, as well as destructive fishing gear, so to catch fish, right? Among them, this famous method of fishing also included, that is the electrofishing. This also not very common in Sri Lanka, but this is very common, especially among the fishermen who do the researchers who do fishing for research purposes, especially in the rivers. They use this electrofishing, actually targeting a particular species or particular individual. Then you have to use this kind of electrofishing. So they use a battery powered a small electric current to to catch fish. So that is the very basic way of doing it, right? So it's a very low voltage electric current that won't kill the fish, but they will get a shock and they can be caught. Right. The other same electrofishing, even you can operate in from a boat, from the battery of a boat. Still you can use electrofishing. Some countries they do, but not common in Sri Lanka. Not common. We don't have this fishing method, right? Other form of most destructive type of fishing gear, we call this using dynamite or some sort of explosive. We call blast fishing. It's so unfortunate, even in Sri Lanka, some fishermen still do this blast fishing, especially in the coral reefs, right? It's so bad. This is illegal, but still the fishermen using, especially in the northeast regions, even in the famous Pigeon Island, sometimes fishermen use this blast fishing. I have personally experienced this. In some cases, we can hear the noise from a blast fishing, and when we are doing some, even when we're doing some underwater surveys, we could hear big noise. It can be extremely dangerous for a diver. But you see now, especially in the coral reefs, extremely bad, because it's maybe 10-15 kilos of fish you are destroying a coral reef, which could have taken hundreds or thousands of years to grow, right? You are just destroying the whole reef with fish, and it's like a totally lost, right? I can't imagine how the fishermen do this kind of fishing gear, how they operate this, but that's how, anyway, it's so unfortunate, right? So other than that, some fishermen still use, as I mentioned before, some poisons. Can be some chemicals as well. For example, rotenone, right? And even some tree extracts, some people still use, right? Other than that, some fishermen still use cyanide, hydrogen cyanide, mainly in the reef fishes, especially catching them for like export, uh, especially for the as a hobby, right? For color fish, they use some poisons. And you can see here, like they put some poisons, and they catch the fish thereafter, right? So this is really bad way of fishing. So this will not only kill the fish they wanted, but the larval stages and on many other the species that living in that habitat, right? So it's extremely bad, right? So the other than that, there are other different ways of catching fish as well. For example, diving can be like a skin diving. I mean, without any dive gear, they use skin diving to catch fish, especially like sea cucumbers, and this case is lobsters, and oysters like the chank or the mutubello, and also the walampuri, the chank or the walampuri, the chank, or this kind of a fish, and also the pearl. They are usually caught with this kind of a diving, either by free diving or using a dive gear. I said this is very popular and becoming popular actually in Sri Lanka. You won't notice, like in the northern region and eastern region, some areas are very popular now for like a diving for commercial species like a sea cucumber. They call atteo, right? I don't know if you have heard about this term, the atteo. The local term atteo is the sea cucumbers. Very popular type of fishing method, that is diving. There are a lot of trained divers. They get well paid, like just like the fishermen going into the sea. The set of divers go into the sea, and they will do the diving for this very important species, right? Some of the diving is at night, right? It's very risky many of the cases, because most of these divers, they do diving without any equipment, no any gauges. It's not doing it like in a professional way, but I mean they can be really good divers, right? But they don't have in gauges, and very risky these things, right? These are some of the images I took from the web, especially during the historical time. The diving has been very popular in Sri Lanka. Well, not by the locals, at least by especially the British era. The lot of British people, and even before that, the Portuguese as well, they were doing a lot of diving for the pearl and chank, especially for the chank, the pearl. Like in the west coast, like in around Putlam, there is like Muthupanthia and some of the areas very popular for this pearl fishery. You see some of the images. This is actually a wooden craft actually, but some of these images has been, this is a drawing, but this image has taken somewhere 1800, I think, doing some pearl fishing in Sri Lanka, right? Now actually it's not very popular something, but it has been very popular. Like some of the well-known figures, something like who started this like a diving in Sri Lanka, Arthur C. Clarke, everybody knows him. So he is actually a pioneer in starting diving in Sri Lanka. So anyway, diving is type of fishing gear, fishing method rather, that can be used in many different ways for fishing as well, right? So So that's all about the different type of fishing gear, the FAO categories, and some of the categories are beyond the FAO categorization, but still they are very important type of fishing gear, right? So with that, we'll conclude that session. I have already uploaded several videos in the LMS site where you can have a look whenever you have a time, like traditional fishing gear like a beach seines, right? And a different type of even fishing craft, likewise. Few different videos already there, and I might keep adding some of the videos as well. So just if anyone interested on a little bit further information, which I don't think you will do, but anyway, for additional readings, if someone is really interested on this particular subject, right? Okay.